All right, hello, my name is Jacob Humphreys, and this is going to be my audition video for Missouri College's, Valley College's debate team. I've been debating since my senior year in high school. Fortunately, at Jeff State, we were able to start a debate team for the first time in our speech team's history. Here, I've served as the debate team captain for a little over a month now. It's been a great privilege. So with that being said, let's get into today's practice round. So first of all, I would like to thank everyone for coming out today. Thank you to my judges for helping us to become better debaters, and thank you to my opponent for having such a great argument, and I can't wait to start today's debate. With that being said, let's get into today's resolution, which says that the U.S. electoral system should be reformed. So let's start off with a few definitions today. U.S. meaning United States, obviously. Electoral system, this is talking about our current election system in the United States. Should, we're just going to define it as obligation. And reformed, we're going to replace it with a plurality style of voting. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that in today's debate. And then the lens of analysis that I would ask for the audience and for my judges to kind of look at this debate is cost-benefit analysis. So if I can provide more benefits in my plan and why Americans as a whole would be more benefited with my plan, then I ultimately win today's debate. So let's get right into it. My first contention is going to be about how the current system is not working. So according to the Huffington Post in 2012, they published this article which gave 10 reasons why the Electoral College is a problem. So today we're going to dissect 2 of these reasons specifically. Subpoint A, it distorts the political process. The Electoral College system distorts the political process. So according to The Atlantic in January of 2016, they talk about this debate over ethanol mandates in Iowa. So in the 2016 primaries, we had Ted Cruz and Donald J. Trump, who were the 2 front runners in Iowa. Today, this contention is basically on how the current system incentivizes candidates to travel more to swing states. And we're going to talk about why this is dangerous. Anyway, Donald Trump and Ted Cruz traveled to the state of Iowa, and they were pandering to the voters in Iowa. So how are they doing this? They were talking about ethanol, which is a heavy topic in Iowa. So Donald Trump ended up winning Iowa's 6 electoral votes in 2016, turning Iowa red for the first time in 2 elections. Donald Trump, in this debate with Ted Cruz, he wanted to raise ethanol subsidies, while Ted Cruz wanted to get rid of them completely. So is it any wonder why Donald Trump ended up winning the state of Iowa? So why is this bad for voters? First of all, it's unfair to other voters that are across the country because our candidates are incentivized to go and to pander to these swing states such as Iowa. So let's talk about my subpoint B, which is on unequal voting power. The Electoral College system causes unequal voting power among Americans. So according to fairvote.org, larger states are at a disadvantage compared to smaller states when it comes to the number of electoral votes allocated to each state. For instance, each individual vote in Wyoming counts nearly 4 times as much in the Electoral College as an individual vote in Texas. This is because Wyoming has 3 electoral votes for a population of 493,000. And Texas has 32 electoral votes for a population of over 20 million people. So, if we look at this closely, we can see that Wyoming has an elector for every 165,000 people. And Texas has an elector for over 652,000 people. This disenfranchises the larger states and ultimately makes our system unequal. Once again, our current system makes it where smaller states have a larger voice than larger states does. This is unfair to individuals living in smaller states. So let's talk about my contention 2, which is going to be my plan. So we're going to talk about plurality voting specifically today. So according to Encyclopedia Britannica, plurality voting is a system where each person votes one time, and whichever candidate pulls more votes, they are elected. And according to the same article, advantage of the plurality system are that it is easily understood by voters. It's pretty straightforward. Whoever pulls the most votes wins. There is no majority here. It provides a quick decision, and it is more convenient and less costly to operate than other methods. So let's talk about my subpoint A, which is on installment. So currently the Constitution provides that an amendment may be proposed either by the Congress with a 2/3 majority vote in both the House of Representatives and the Senate, or by a constitutional convention called for by 2/3 of the state legislatures. So according to this is according to archives.gov. This sounds difficult, right? Enter the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. This is where 10 states have already signed into this idea already. This idea was brought into play in 2006 by John R. Koza. And it's a way to get around the Electoral College without completely scrapping it. So according to the Miami Herald in November of 2016, this was according to the Miami Herald, rather. So they added to this by saying that state legislatures could pass laws agreeing to award their electoral votes to the candidate who wins the national popular vote. But it only kicks in when enough states sign in to add up to 270 electoral votes. So what does this mean exactly? These 10 states got together and they signed this compact saying whoever wins the popular vote gets all of their electoral votes. So these 10 states now total 165. So now we need 105 more electoral votes before this system can be enacted. This is a viable option in reforming the current system and should be looked into. So now let's talk about the benefits in my subpoint B. So this is going to be subpoint B, it's going to be on benefits. Number one is that it fixes the political process. So plurality voting would fix the problem of candidates not visiting hard blue or red states. Candidates would have to restructure the way they campaign in order to garner as many votes as possible. So let's talk about my second benefit behind my plan today, and it's that more people would vote. The United States Election Project ran a survey from 1787 to 2016 where they said that swing states have a higher turnout than states who weren't a swing state. Plurality voting makes Americans feel like their votes count for something, and that is ultimately what we desire as Americans. Let's talk about my third benefit today, and it's on equal voting power. According to the article from the Pensive Post, plurality voting would make a one-person, one-vote system, and this really equalizes the American vote. One person equals one vote under this system. I ask for an affirmative ballot, and I ask for a judge to vote for a reformation of our electoral system. Thank you. Yeah, I'll use my timer.
Ready?
Yep.
Doing okay today, Jacob?
Doing good.
Cool. Glad to be here debating you. Just a few questions for you. In your first subpoint, I believe you talked about, your subpoint B in your first contention, you discussed how there was unequal voting power. Can you give the example that you gave one more time, please?
Yeah, so I talked about how Wyoming, which is a smaller state, they have more power than a larger state, such as Texas. I said
what was the number to the electoral votes, rather? I'm sorry.
Yeah, Wyoming has 3 electoral votes for a population of over 490,000, and Texas has 32 electoral votes for a population of over 20 million. So that means that Texas has an elector for every 652,000 people, and Wyoming has one for every 165,000 people.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So if Texas had more electoral votes, would that kind of even out the disbursement? Would that maybe raise that? If we raise that electoral voting number for the amount of population, would it fix the process?
Yeah. So my job as the affirmative today is just to prove that we should be that the system should be more equal, and that's the whole point of my case today, is to prove that it's not equal. So I believe if we go to a plurality style of voting, then one person will equal one vote, which will therefore make it more equal among the states.
One person, one vote. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
What kind of so with the interstate compact voting system,
Yeah.
you said that we needed 10 more states. 10 states have signed on, so we need another 160 electoral votes.
No, we need another 105 more electoral votes, so that could vary
So it could essentially just be like another 5 states that sign on.
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
You know, if you click California, that has a lot of electoral votes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
All right. Everyone ready? Great. I want to say thanks to my opponent for presenting some great contentions to today's resolution and for today's debate. I look forward to some great clash. With that being said, I am going to restate the resolution that the U.S. electoral system should be reformed, and I accept the weighting criteria that my opponent has laid out for us as a cost benefit, and I also accept all the definitions. U.S. meaning United States, electoral system meaning our current system, should is that we have an obligation, and reform meaning plurality. With that being said, I'm going to do my best as the negative to just defend the status quo rather, and not necessarily show a different plan, but why the plan that we have is working and why it doesn't necessarily need to be changed, because it has worked. With that being said, I'm just going to kind of get right into my opponent's contentions and go through my own refutations. So my opponent's first contention is that our current system is not working. He says that in his first subpoint, he says that our current system is not working. Well, according to a 2016 Independent.uk article, there have been 5 times in the history of the United States since the inception of the Electoral College. 56 times there have been 56 presidential elections. In 52 out of 56 times, this process has worked flawlessly. So that means 5 times in history there's been a president that has won the nomination by winning the electoral votes, but not winning the popular vote. I would like for everyone to just consider that going into this for the rest of this debate. His first subpoint, he says that it distorts the political process, and he says he gave an example of Iowa being a swing state, and that candidates pander to swing states, and he used the example of the ethanol subsidies that Trump and Ted Cruz kind of used as their main platform argument in Iowa when they caucused in Iowa, and because they pander to that local issue, that it turned Iowa from a blue state to a red state. Well, it's predicted that, according to Botanica.org, that if we move to a plurality voting system, that it would dissolve local issues into platform issues. So a candidate could just essentially platform on main issues like Medicare, Social Security, military spending, all things like that, and kind of just forget about the local issues, because we're just going to go to areas that have the most saturated amount of people because we're looking for the plurality vote. And that kind of leads me into my segue for a second subpoint is an unequal voting power, which is essentially saying that he used the analogy of Wyoming having 3 electoral votes for a population of X number of people. Texas has 33 electoral votes for a population of X amount of people. And I asked my opponent in cross-examination that what if we just increase the number of electoral votes? Would that help fix the problem? If that's the problem, if they need more electoral votes, then why don't we just increase the electoral votes? And that would kind of minimize that disparity, or at least make it less. So let's talk about how it would distort the political process just a little bit more. It's argued that with a plurality vote, a candidate could campaign in areas that have the most saturated amount of people. If one person equals 1 vote, they have to obtain the most votes. So a candidate could really just go to a place like California and campaign on. He uses the example of unequal voting. He used the example of Iowa subsidies to show that that is a bad thing, and that is a direct result of the electoral college system. But if we look at what a candidate like Hillary Clinton or a Democrat that campaigns on things like subsidies and things of that nature, then we could essentially just assume that a candidate like that would go to an area that has a large number of people that look for that, that sort of thing from their candidate, and they could just say, hey, well, I'm going to, increase Social Security spending, I'm going to increase Medicare, I'm going to increase funding to welfare. They could go to a state like Texas and say that they're going to increase funding, to the VA, and they could essentially just win that state by campaigning on major platform issues right there. So his second contention is his plan, and he uses the Interstate Compact Act as his main argument, He states that with the Interstate Compact Act, that 10 states have already signed on, and that we need essentially 270 electoral votes in order for this to come into action, and that a candidate would just they would give the most electoral votes to the person who's won the popular vote. So each state would allocate their electoral votes to the candidate that won the popular vote. Well, in our last election, 2016, if that same system was in play, we would see a place like California giving their electoral votes to the person who won the popular vote, which is Hillary Clinton. That happened in our last election. With a person that wins the popular vote, we would need to see that system work in a situation like that. And that situation is already in place currently. That was not a problem. Hillary Clinton didn't win the popular vote in Alabama.
So let me get this set to 2 minutes. All right, let's get started. All right, so first of all, thank you, Rich, for a great argument. Let's get right into it. So you mentioned that 52 out of 56 times this electoral system has worked, correct?
Correct.
Are you aware, how many times out of the last 5 elections that it hasn't worked?
4 times to be exact.
Yeah, so out of the last 5 elections, so 2 of these times it did not work.
Oh, wait.
Yeah. 2 out of the last 5 elections, this electoral system didn't work. That's almost half. So would you say that
in 20 years, give or take, it hasn't worked?
Yeah. So 2 elections out of the last 20 years. Would you agree that this may be a growing problem to some?
Perhaps maybe if it was, happened back to back.
Okay. You mentioned that the plurality vote, it would decrease emphasis on local issues, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So as a presidential candidate, how much should they focus on local issues as compared to military spending, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security? What should be the balance there?
Well, in your argument, your first contention, a state completely turned colors because of that emphasis on the said local issues. So, I would assume because of that change, they should focus a great deal on it.
Okay. So do you think that if a candidate panders to these swing states, do you think that's necessarily a bad thing?
No, I don't actually.
Okay. So if we increase, you mentioned increasing electoral votes to larger states. Doesn't this equal reformation? Isn't this reforming the system?
It is.
Okay. That's all I have. Thank you. All right, so this is going to be my second time speaking, so I'm going to have 3 minutes on the clock. Once again, thank you all for coming out. Thank you to my opponent, Rich, for putting together such a great argument. And thank you to my judges for helping me and Rich to become better debaters. That being said, let's get right into Rich's refutations that he made, and then I'll go back over my benefits today. So my first contention was on how the current system was not working. My subpoint A was that the current system distorts the political process. If you'll remember, I talked about how candidates have to pander to voters in swing states in order to garner their votes. So we talked about how this was turning Iowa red for the first time in 2 elections. My opponent mentioned in cross-ex that pandering could be a good thing. And yes, to the voters in that state, it could be a good thing, but it's not equal. That is my case today, that the current system is not equal. My opponent then goes on to mention in my subpoint A, when I talked about distorts the political process, he says that 52 out of 56 times that this system has worked. Well, I brought up the statistic that 2 out of the last 5 elections that it hasn't working. This is a growing problem. In the last 20 years, 2 of our elections did not work. That's almost half of the elections that we have had in the last 20 years haven't worked because of this system. So let's talk about my subpoint B, which is on unequal voting power. My opponent, among the states, my opponent goes on to say that we should increase electoral votes in Texas. I would argue that this would be a reformation, which is what the resolution today is, what I'm supposed to be affirming. So I agree that there should be some sort of reformation. My opponent goes on to say that candidates would have to stay in larger states in order to garner these votes, which simply isn't true, because these larger states, they have 25% of the voting power in the United States. So what about the other 75%? My opponent went on to say that in his refutation of my subpoint B that plurality voting could diminish local issues. But my opponent didn't give any evidence in order to back this up. And I would argue that presidential candidates need to focus on national issues anyway, like Medicare, Social Security, and military spending. So let's get my opponent's refutations on my plan, which is my contention too, particularly with the interstate compact voting system. He went on to say that, well, if Hillary Clinton, since she won California, then those votes already would have went to her. This is not a partisan issue. This should be a bipartisan issue. We should recognize the harms that the current electoral system has on Americans, and we should move past that, and then we should adopt plurality voting. And by installing it, we should adopt the interstate compact vote. With that being said, I'm going to get back into my benefits. The first one is that it fixes the political process. The second one is that more people would vote. And third, that we would have equal voting power. This was the weighting mechanism that we used in today's debate, was cost-benefit. And I have presented more benefits than my opponent has mentioned cost. With that being said, I ask for affirmative vote. Thank you.